Welcome to Chez Genèse, the place of new beginnings. My name is 𝘴𝘦𝘦𝘯, and I founded and own a French-inspired cafe where, as a team, we are on a mission to change the way our world views and employs adults with disabilities. Our restaurant was born and is based in Greensboro, North Carolina, and that's where we practice and teach our mission and model. This is our channel where we dive in deep to who we are, what we do, and why we do it. Our hope is that this content is empowering to disabled and non-disabled humans alike, and that no matter what perspective you are coming from, whether that's employer, employee, parent, friend, or Chez Genèse fan, you feel welcomed, you learn something new, and you walk away with a deeper appreciation and understanding of humanity. Hi everybody, welcome back. My name is 𝘴𝘦𝘦𝘯. I am so excited today to be continuing our conversation on disorders and disability. This is part of our overall mission of changing the way that our world both views and employs people with disabilities. Last week, if you missed it, I shared more of my personal story with obsessive compulsive disorder and what it's like living with a disorder, at least from my own personal experience. And today we're going to talk about what is the difference between a disorder and a disability. Are there any overlap between those two things? Who decides what category it falls into, and what's the benefit of naming or claiming something as a disability or as a disorder? So this is a question that's come up before in some of the workshops that we teach. It's a great question. There's honestly not a ton of information out there that super specifically breaks it down. You can find information about disorders, you can find information about disability. From my research, at least, I wasn't readily stumbling across a lot of side-by-side comparisons, and so it can be confusing, and there's already a ton of confusion in our world and culture around disability, and we're trying to clear that up as much as we can. So we're going to jump in, but to start out and kind of clarify, the World Health Organization defines a disorder as a mental disorder is characterized by a clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior. So that's at least the World Health Organization definition of disorder. The CDC, for a definition of disability, says a disability is any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. So both of those definitions are still, I think, somewhat, not necessarily vague, but just broad. So it's an umbrella definition or category and not necessarily something that gets super into the details or specific. And hearing both of those side by side, I feel like that doesn't necessarily clear up where the two don't overlap or where the differences may fall. So a helpful distinction as we move forward in this video is to remember that a disorder is a medical diagnosis. So think disorder, think medical, and disability is a legal classification. So disorder, medical, disability, legal. And then we're going to break it down from there. And this is where you'll start to see there are some medical conditions or disorders that may fall under the umbrella of disability, but a disability in and of itself is not a diagnosis, and not all medical diagnosis or disorders are going to fall under the category of disability. That's important for several different reasons, but if you're thinking about medical, think more educational, more treatment-based. And then if you're thinking legal, you're going to think more rights and protection. So both are important, both are needed. You need the medical in order to understand what the diagnosis is, which is great for providing us with more resources and more information about ourselves and about life moving forward. That's going to vary for every person, and that's going to vary for every diagnosis. But then for disability, that's really important in understanding what disability rights are, what your privileges are, and how to stand in both of those things. So That being said, there's a lot of different types of disorders. There are a lot of different things that fall under the classification of disability. We're not going to go into all of them today, but a general rule of thumb is that a disorder can be classified as a disability depending on the severity or level of impact that that disorder may have on the life of the person who has it. So, in the disability world, and from a legal standpoint, in order for something to be protected under the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which, if you did not know, did not actually get written into law until 1990, which is not that long ago in our history. So it's still something that's relatively new, and my hope is that we continue to see disability rights progress further and further within our society. As I was doing research for this episode, do you call it an episode on a YouTube channel? I know you do on a podcast. Anyways, for this video, there's still a lot of words that are used on government websites and large medical websites too that talk about impairment, challenges, and in the disability rights world, a lot of times we're trying to move away from some of that language because of the stigma or the negative connotations that they can have. So there's still some discrepancies between the platforms that are making rules and are putting information into the world, and then the people that are being impacted by them. But the ADA has a great website. It's very in-depth. There's a lot of ground that the ADA covers. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in learning about service animals, if you're interested in learning about accessibility, about anything related to disability rights, it's a wonderful resource, and the website is actually a lot of fun and very interactive, I think, to navigate. But there's a list of conditions that are typically considered to fall under the disability umbrella, and some of them surprised me. There were several that I was like, yep, I already knew that made sense, and then there were several that I wasn't aware actually fell into that category. So cancer was one, diabetes is another. I'm trying to remember the whole list. I didn't write that part down. Hearing loss and deafness, vision loss or blindness, physical disabilities such as being in a wheelchair, having paralysis, HIV, autism, cerebral palsy. Those are all listed as disabilities. There are some others as well. Post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injuries. Anyways, so there are some disorders that are listed as a disability that the ADA kind of breaks down. In order to be classified as a disability, it must impact, and it'll list out the areas of life and the significance of that. So if you're really curious about that, we'll put that down in our notes below. You can link over and look at it. Again, we're not going to go into all of that detail today, but the gist of it is a disorder can classify as a disability, but not necessarily. The level of impact that that disorder has to the individual's life is in large part what dictates whether or not it classifies as a disability. A disorder is a medical diagnosis, and a disability is a legal classification. So all of that to say, what's my perspective just in terms of navigating things for myself, and then also being in a world or a setting where disclosure is a large part of it. And I have known and understand some friends, staff, etc., to self-diagnose in some cases, and what's my opinion on that? So I do think that while understanding disorder or disability can be really helpful, I do understand when people get hesitant to fall under a label or to label themselves or someone else. Again, I think a lot of times because of the stigma or sometimes then misunderstandings that happen culturally when a label is slapped onto someone, it can be, I've seen it happen where there are assumptions immediately drawn about a person based off of the information that they disclosed. So if someone says, I have autism, someone who's being introduced to that may just form a connection with someone else that they know who has autism and assume that both people have the same traits and personalities, and that, oh, you have autism, it's the same. And that's not true. Each individual is unique and things are going to look different for everybody. So I think that while a diagnosis is helpful for understanding ourselves, for receiving clarity, education, etc., that's great. Disability classification is very helpful in terms of protecting rights, but I do think that it's up to the individual how they want to talk about those things and what they want to disclose. And if they've found that it's actually not helpful, it's more harmful for them to disclose either of those things, then I encourage them to do what makes them feel the most safe and the most seen. And I've also known people who maybe wouldn't, from a legal standpoint, actually fall under a disability classification, but for a personal acceptance or understanding of where they're at in their life, it's helpful to claim a disability, whether that's a disorder that they personally feel like impacts them enough to be a disability, or if it's something that's temporary. So that's kind of my overall opinion, is there's value in understanding and holding both disorder and disability and understanding the distinction between the two. When it comes to personal disclosure, what makes a person feel most safe and most seen is what's important at the end of the day. So that's it. If you have questions, comments, please leave them below. If you don't already subscribe to us, but you regularly watch our channel and you enjoyed this content and information, please subscribe. I think that's it. We'll be back next week.